Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'll be with you to sometime around 3 o'clock. You are watching a fascinating sentencing hearing right now, and this was Quintilla Higgins. That's Quincinio Canada's mother, who was speaking in the mitigation phase. That is the part of the case where she's trying to justify that there should be a lower sentence in the sentencing range that the judge can impose under the law. There was cross-examination by the prosecutor there. There were some very interesting statements that were being made. She seemed a little edgy as far as I was concerned. It seemed like she wasn't accepting a lot of responsibility for the actions. I don't know. It's interesting. Do you find this kind of testimony valuable or not valuable? And at one point in time, she basically didn't really even know her son's birthday, which I thought was kind of odd. It was a good question by the prosecutor. So we're watching. We got a lot of things going on here in the Law and Crime Network. And I'm lucky enough this afternoon to be able to have Ronn Blitzer with me. And Ron is a senior editor at the Law and Crime Network, and he's going to be breaking this down and all the other cases that we have going on. So I don't know, Ron, what did you think? Was this an effective mitigation strategy to put the mom on the way she was?
You know, like you said, I didn't think that it was necessarily that valuable. It's a little bit weird, hesitating, not being sure about, his birthday, makes you think that maybe she wasn't as close with him and may not have as reliable information or justification for defending him as one would think. So if you're trying to mitigate the circumstances here and try and argue for a lesser sentence, this may not be the best way.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is the process. A lot of people are asking, does this go on necessarily in all courts around the country? And the answer to that is no. You don't necessarily get into extensive testimony like this under oath on a witness stand. That has changed a lot over the years, even in Jersey and New York, where the victims are allowed to give victim impact testimony, Ron. And the defense can put on a couple of witnesses to just kind of speak to the judge in terms of pleas of mercy. But this is unusual here, where you're actually able to put testimony on with respect to the wide sentencing range the judge is given here. And what we're essentially doing is finding out, will the judge give an extended term of sentence because of the previous record? And even so, the massive ranges the judge has discretion with. And there's a big argument about the judge's discretion in cases. People think it should always be a mandatory sentence. What are your thoughts about that?
We've seen a lot of cases where people have been upset over what they feel to be unjustly light sentences in a wide variety of cases. The most famous one in recent memory was the Brock Turner case out in California. He was the former Stanford swimmer who was convicted of sexual assault and got a very light sentence, and people were up in arms calling for the judge to be recalled. But in that case and in other cases, there are laws surrounding sentences in a lot of cases. You have mandatory minimums in some cases. Whether or not people agree with those is a different story.
Right, right. So this was a fascinating case because these individuals were on trial for murder. The jury could not come to a conclusion with respect to that in this Marine murder case, but they did convict them of robberies. There's always that kind of thing that exists where you may not have been able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt with regard to the murder charges, but everybody kind of knows that that's in the background. So I'm sure the prosecutor is very, very disappointed they weren't able to prove the murder case, but they're going to try and get every ounce they can out of these robbery cases.
Yeah, and that's something that the judge is going to keep in mind also. The judge is not the trier of fact when it comes to determining innocence or guilt, but when it comes to sentencing, the judge may have their own opinion about what happened, and if they think, oh, well, we didn't convict them for murder, but if the judge thinks that he was guilty, then that may shift the judge into giving a harsher penalty for the charges where there was a conviction. Right,
great. Well, we see there's more testimony that's coming on. A woman is walking over to the stand. She was just sworn in by the judge. So let's get back to it, see who it is, and we'll catch the audience on the other side of the break. Hi, it's Bob Bianchi with Ronn Blitzer again. That was a really quick witness, Ron, and basically the thing that stuck out of me is that he's a good person, and at the end of the day, he deserves a chance. That's from Sarah Smith, who's Quincinio Canada's aunt. Real fast testimony. I mean, is this accomplishing anything here?
You try and get as much as you can out of these, to try and argue that this is really a good person who may have done something bad instead of, some hardened criminal who is just rotten to the core. You would generally expect a little bit more than that. Yeah.
Right, right. And you have multiple robbery convictions, persistent offender statute. Kind of hard to get up there in my mind and say that he's a good person. At the end of the day, he deserves a chance. He may be a good person, but he's had apparently repeated chances in the past that have failed, and he's still involved in violent crime, and I don't think that that's going to go well over with the judge.
Yeah, and if you're trying to counteract that kind of history by saying he's really a good person, you're going to need a little more than that. You're going to need to demonstrate examples of this and why, even though there are multiple instances where he's been in trouble with the law, that in the grand scheme of things, that is outweighed by other factors.
Right. And Ron, listen, even as a prosecutor, when I used to prosecute people and put them in jail for very long periods of time, I did feel bad for the family members. People like this. She's a hardworking woman. She works at a hospital. The collateral consequences, as we would call it, to the family, because they're victims too. The victims who were robbed were victims, and the family of the defendant are victims in cases like this.
Oh, absolutely. You always think about the effect that this has on the family, and I myself, being a former prosecutor, even in some cases where I'm putting someone in jail, I felt bad for them too. Even if they have a history, you start thinking about their circumstances and what led them down that path.
Always got to keep that humanity. Listen, you're at the Law and Crime Network, and we are at the sentencing hearing right now, Quincynia, Canada. This is a Dan Abrams production, and you can't get any better gavel-to-gavel coverage than what we're doing right now. But we're going to have to throw to a break, and we'll come back on the other end, and we'll discuss this case a little bit more at Ron.